She walked into my house like she owned it. And then she said, I'm turning your living room into my yoga studio. No question, no permission, just took over. I said nothing, but I started counting. Every hour she stretched on my rug. Every time her friends left muddy footprints on my floors. She thought silence meant weakness. But I wasn't planning a fight. I was planning a takeover. 3 months later, she didn't just lose the living room. She lost her whole house. Because I bought her mortgage. And I made sure she never disrespected space that wasn't hers again. She was only supposed to stay for a week. 1 week. That's what I told myself when I opened my front door and saw Madison standing there, holding 2 overstuffed suitcases and a half-eaten granola bar. Her mascara was smudged. She looked like a sad puppy that had been left out in the rain. My roommate kicked me out, she said, lips trembling. Just for a week. Kendra, I promise. Just until I figure things out. Madison is my cousin. We grew up braiding each other's hair and pretending our Barbies were secret agents. She was always dramatic, but family is family. So I let her in. My little 2-bedroom house in Savannah, Georgia, had always felt peaceful. After my divorce, I bought it by myself, down payment, closing costs, all of it. It was mine, quiet, sunlit, safe. But the moment Madison stepped through the threshold, that peace began to crack. At first, it was little things. Her shampoo bottles invading my side of the shower. Her shoes scattered across the hallway like landmines. A half-empty smoothie left on the coffee table overnight. I said nothing. I smiled, because I thought I could handle it. But week 1 turned into week 2, then 3, then she brought in a rug. Not just any rug, a massive white faux fur rug. She rolled it out across my living room floor without asking. It's for my yoga practice, she said cheerfully. It'll help with my energy alignment. I stared at her big, entitled smile, and said nothing. That night, I came home and found she had pushed my armchair into the corner. My coffee table was gone. I moved it to the garage, she explained. It didn't really match the vibe. The vibe of my house. I should have told her to leave then and there, but I didn't. Because I was tired and polite, and I thought deep down maybe she just needed time to heal. But Madison wasn't healing. She was nesting, colonizing. By month 2, she had installed hanging plants in the corners of my ceiling. She bought a standing mirror and leaned it against the living room wall. She placed a little wooden sign near the window that said Namaste Zone. The worst part, she started teaching yoga classes from my living room. 6 women showed up on a Tuesday at 7 p.m. with rolled-up mats and lemon water. I walked in from work, exhausted, and there they were doing downward dog where my coffee table used to be. I cleared my throat. No one moved. They acted like I was the intruder. After the session, I tried to speak. Madison brushed me off with a laugh. You're barely ever in here, she said. I thought I'd make use of the space. I swallowed my rage. Because rage doesn't work with people like Madison. She twists it, plays victim. So I stayed quiet. I cleaned up the lemon peels, and I started making a plan. Because sometimes silence is not weakness, it's strategy. And she had no idea she was playing chess with the wrong opponent. It started with a candle, a tiny thing, lavender and eucalyptus. It sat on the windowsill next to my grandmother's plant, one Madison never watered. By the way, she lit that candle like it was some sacred ritual. She said it helped cleanse the aura of the space. But to me, it smelled like a boundary being burned. From there, it escalated. Madison bought a Bluetooth speaker the size of a microwave. She placed it under the TV stand, my TV stand, and filled the house with chants and drums and instrumental healing frequencies. At 6 a.m. every morning. I woke up not to my alarm, but to the sound of monks chanting in G major. I told her once, just once, that it was too loud. She rolled her eyes. Your cortisol levels are probably too high. This helps with cellular vibration. Cellular vibration, what about my peace? By week 8, she had stopped knocking on my door. She acted like the house was hers. She started receiving packages, big ones, one afternoon. I came home and found a full-sized clothing rack in the hallway, filled with yoga sets in every shade of beige imaginable. She was building a brand inside my home. That night, I stood in the kitchen, looking at the rack, the candle, the plants, the rug, the mirror, the speaker, the makeshift studio, and I realized I wasn't living with Madison. I was living in her set. She turned my living room into a curated Instagram corner. Every inch of my house was now on brand for her. And me, I had become the background noise. But I didn't complain, because I knew something she didn't. I knew how much debt she was in. I had overheard her on the phone. Twice. Once with a credit card company. Once with a mortgage broker. She had her eye on a house in Jacksonville, a fixer-upper she was planning to flip into a wellness retreat. The arrogance of it. She had no steady income. She was living rent-free, using my utilities, eating my food, and somehow she thought she was ready to become a homeowner. But that wasn't the part that truly got me. It was the little pink note she left on my fridge one Thursday morning. Please don't enter the living room after 4 p.m., filming content. No, please and thank you. No conversation. Just a taped-up post-it, like she was my landlord. That day, I sat in my bedroom, scrolling Zillow, and I found it, the house she wanted. I recognized it from the pictures she'd shown a friend on speakerphone. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, corner lot, yellow shutters. I clicked deeper, looked up the mortgage details. It was listed under a pending FHA loan. She had barely scraped together the down payment. But what she didn't know was that the current owner had taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago, and that second note was in default, meaning that house was about to be repossessed, and that second mortgage could be bought quietly, legally, by anyone, including me. I made a call, then another. I created a small LLC, something clean, something forgettable. Oak Haven Holdings, LLC, sounded like a landscaping company. Perfect. Within 2 weeks, the deal was done. I now held the lien, and Madison had no clue. Back at my house, she was flying higher than ever. More classes, more clients. She even hosted a full moon circle in my backyard, complete with candles, crystals, and chanting women in flowy dresses. I watched them from my kitchen window, drinking my wine, using my bathroom, living in my space. And that night, I slept better than I had in weeks, because I knew what was coming. She marked her territory, in my house, so I claimed hers. I didn't yell, didn't post about it, didn't warn her. I just waited. The first payment came due, then the second. She missed both. Of course she did. She was too busy filming breathwork reels and buying soy candles in bulk. So I sent the notice a final warning. Official, stamped, signed, by me. 3 days later, she stormed into my kitchen with the paper in hand. "This is from Oak Haven Holdings," she said. "Do you know what this is?" I looked at her, sipped my tea, and smiled. "Yeah," I said, "I do." Her eyes widened. You did this?" I tilted my head. "You took my living room," I said. "I took your mortgage." She stared at me like I had slapped her, like I had broken some invisible code. But I hadn't. I had followed the law. I had used the same quiet audacity she had been weaponizing for months. Only this time the silence was mine, and it was deafening. She didn't speak to me for 2 days. She tiptoed around the house like a ghost. No more incense, no more chanting, no more sunrise affirmations blasting through the walls. It was peaceful, almost like getting my home back inch by quiet inch. But the storm wasn't over, because Madison wasn't one to accept defeat, not without trying to spin it. She sat me down on the third day right there on my kitchen counter and gave me a monologue about betrayal, about family stabbing each other in the back, about how my energy had changed since the divorce. She cried. I didn't. Because her tears weren't for loss. They were for control slipping through her fingers. "You don't understand," she said. wiping her cheek with the sleeve of a borrowed sweater. This was supposed to be my start. That house was going to change my life. I let the silence speak. She filled it with apologies she didn't mean. But then she made one final move. She begged to stay just until she could figure out the foreclosure paperwork. Said she couldn't go back to living with her mom. Said she needed a stable space to meditate, to recalibrate her life. I told her she had 1 week, 7 days. The same time frame she had originally asked for when she showed up on my porch with those overstuffed bags and trembling lips. She didn't argue, she just nodded, quietly, and for the first time in months, she didn't light a candle that night, didn't turn on her speaker, didn't roll out her yoga mat. She sat in silence, because finally she understood what silence meant. It meant you don't own everything just because you moved in. You don't get to call someone else's piece your playground. You don't get to conquer a space without expecting a counterattack. Her friends stopped coming over. She stopped taking calls in the living room. She stayed in the guest room, door closed, like she should have from the beginning. And on the 7th day, she left. No goodbye. Just a set of keys on the counter. And a house that finally felt like mine again. But I wasn't done. Because revenge doesn't stop with silence. It continues in peace, in reclaiming every part of yourself that was overshadowed. I donated the rug, took down the mirror, scrubbed the wax stains out of the windowsill, and I sat on my reclaimed couch with a cup of tea and looked around. Not at what I had lost, but at everything I had taken back. Quietly, legally, completely. 3 weeks passed. That was how long it took for her to text me again. It was short, just 4 words. Can we talk sometime? I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I had already said everything I needed to say with my silence, with a lean, with a signature. But let me take you back to the moment it truly shifted. It was 2 days after she left. I was sweeping the living room. The room she had once claimed, the one that had been mine all along. And I found something tucked under the sofa. A little vision board, cutouts, from magazines. Words like freedom, success, balance pinned beside pictures of beach houses and spiritual retreats. At the center, a photo of the house in Jacksonville, the one I now owned. It hit me then. She never saw me as family. She saw me as temporary, as a launch pad, a space she could use and outgrow, like old yoga mats or expired tea. I put the board in a box, labeled it storage, put it in the attic where it belonged. I didn't hate her, I didn't need to, because I had something stronger. Clarity, and once you see people clearly, you stop needing their apology. Weeks passed quietly. I went back to work, started jogging in the mornings, cooking for one without someone hovering in my kitchen, criticizing my spice rack. I opened windows again. Let in light and fresh air, not sage smoke and so-called sacred frequency music. And then one Friday I got a letter. It was from the city clerk, a notification that the Jacksonville house had new development interest. Someone wanted to lease the property for short-term rental. They listed me as the legal contact. And that was when the idea came, the final layer, the cherry on top of my quiet little revenge. I hired a designer, not for yoga aesthetics, not for vision boards and essential oils, but for functionality, practical beauty, clean colors, hardwood floors, neutral modernity. I turned that Jacksonville house, the one she dreamed of making hers, into something far more powerful. A real investment. I listed it as a corporate rental for traveling professionals. The first tenant, a marketing executive from Atlanta, paid 2 months upfront. That one contract covered everything she had borrowed from me and more. I walked into my bank with the check in hand. No rage, no victory dance, just that satisfying hum of quiet justice. Then came the message. She must have seen the listing online. Recognized the windows, the layout. Maybe even the small potted plant on the porch. She sent a second message, so it is true. You actually turned it into a rental. I just replied yes. She didn't say anything else that day. But 2 days later, I saw her name pop up in a community forum asking if anyone knew of rooms available for sublease. She was looking, again. The irony was delicious. She had tried to claim space she didn't own, and now she couldn't even claim a bedroom. I didn't feel pity, I felt relief, because it meant the world was finally catching up to what I had known all along. You cannot build peace on someone else's foundation, not without consequences. The universe may be slow, but it never forgets. Months passed. The rental stayed full. Reviews rolled in clean, modern, peaceful, all words I had not heard in months when Madison was still in my space. I visited once, to check on maintenance, to see it with my own eyes. The walls were painted a warm, soft gray. The kitchen glowed under natural light. And in the corner, where she once wanted to place her altar and crystals, was a reading chair facing the window. I sat there for a minute, let the sunlight land on my lap, and I breathed. Not for cleansing, not for vibrations, just because it felt good. It was quiet but not empty. It was mine. And that more than any fight, more than any text message, was the real win. The eviction notice arrived at her new apartment 3 weeks after the forum post. I didn't send it. Life did, when you borrow time from the world and never pay it back. Eventually, it collects. She had found a shared space on the edge of town, a tiny 2-bedroom with chipped cabinets and a roommate who played video games at full volume. I only knew because she mentioned it once in a public comment thread. Back when she still thought vague bitterness was power. But the world had changed. She wasn't the girl on the mat anymore. She was a woman with bills and no plan, and that house in Jacksonville, the one she had tried to manifest into her new beginning, was doing just fine without her. I kept my distance, because victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it just walks away. But then I got a call. From a number I didn't recognize, I answered out of habit. And there it was, her voice, soft-strained. She asked if I had a minute. I said I did. She told me she had lost her part-time job, that the roommate had moved in a boyfriend who didn't like her, that things were hard. Then she paused. I waited because I already knew where this was going. She asked if I would consider letting her rent the Jacksonville house. Said she could pay month to month, even do some cleaning or light maintenance if needed. Said she missed the porch swing. Said she missed me. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. The silence on the line stretched. She didn't fill it this time. Maybe she was learning. I told her the house was occupied, that there was a wait list, that it wasn't available. She said she understood, said thank you anyway, and hung up. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there and stared at the ceiling for a while. It felt like something had closed a door, a loop, a season. And as strange as it sounds, I was grateful. Not for her downfall, but for the clarity her chaos had forced me to find. Before Madison moved in, I was always accommodating, always adjusting to make others comfortable. I thought that was kindness. But now I know. Kindness without boundaries is just self-erasure. She had erased me for a while, with rugs and crystals and breathwork circles, but I came back, not louder, just more solid. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The living room became my new studio. No longer a space I tiptoed around, but a space that bore my brush strokes, my light, my story. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a former client of Madison's. Apparently, she had used my address as a business location. They wanted a refund, said she canceled last minute and never returned the deposit. I sent the letter back with a note. Madison no longer resides here, and she never had permission to use this address. It felt good, clear, final. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire, it's water slow, certain, unstoppable. I planted a garden that spring, tomatoes, basil, lavender. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lavender was her scent of choice, but mine grew from the ground, rooted, tended, not bought in jars and burned with an agenda. The neighbors came by more often. They said the house felt lighter. They brought over muffins. One even offered to build me a bench for the porch. I accepted, not because I needed help, but because sometimes allowing good people in is also part of the healing. That summer, the Jacksonville house reached full booking for 3 months straight. The reviews were consistent. Calm, clean, thoughtful design. Exactly what I had hoped. I hired a property manager, freed up more of my time. Time I spent on hikes, on reading, on remembering who I was before someone else's noise filled every corner of my peace. And still, every now and then, I thought of her. Not with anger, not even with regret, but with a kind of distant acceptance. She was a lesson, not a villain, and I was no longer a victim. I was the author, the landlord, the builder of my own boundaries, my own home, my own peace. And that kind of power doesn't need to shout. It simply grows, in silence, in strength, in sunlight. The final proof of power is not in what you say. It is in what you no longer need to explain. It had been nearly a year since she moved out, 11 months of peace. Of quiet mornings and long evenings filled with things I chose. Books I wanted to read, recipes I wanted to try, paintings I actually finished. The house looked different now, not just cleaner, not just brighter but steadier, like it knew it was finally being respected again. There were no more caution zones, no corners hijacked by someone else's incense or affirmations, just space mine. One Saturday morning I received an envelope in the mail, handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Madison. For a moment I debated opening it, but closure does not come from avoidance. It comes from being able to face the very thing and feel nothing crawl under your skin. I opened it in the kitchen. The light poured through the window, the same light she once blocked with her makeshift curtain of prayer flags. The letter was short, just 3 paragraphs. She said she was moving out of state. She had found a new opportunity in Arizona, working at a wellness retreat center. She said she learned a lot, that she had made mistakes, that she hoped I was well. No grand apology, no excuses, just a quiet end note. I folded the letter back into the envelope, placed it in a drawer. Not because I needed to hold on to it, but because part of healing is remembering you survived something and chose not to become it. She moved on, so did I. But what stayed with me, what echoed louder than any chant she had ever played in my home, was the transformation that came after. I started mentoring women at a local shelter, women who had lost their sense of home. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. Women who were told they had no space until they believed it. I told them my story, not to brag, but to show them what reclaiming looks like, that it does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence and a single locked door. They asked me how I knew when it was time to act. I said it started the day someone moved my coffee table without asking, and ended the moment I no longer needed to say no out loud. Because real boundaries are not performances. They are quiet contracts we make with ourselves. That fall, I was invited to speak at a local women's conference, topic owning your space without apology. I stepped onto the stage in a navy blazer and jeans, simple, strong, real. I looked out into the crowd, a sea of women, some young, some with gray hair, all of them carrying stories they had never told out loud. And I told them about Madison, about the rug, the yoga classes, the pink sticky notes, and I told them about the lien, the mortgage, the property I now managed from a place of calm. The crowd did not cheer, they did not gasp, they listened, because they understood that this was not about revenge, it was about remembrance, of self, of ownership, of space. After the event, a woman in her 50s came up to me. She said, "I let my sister take over our parents' house after the funeral. I just stepped back because I did not want to fight, but maybe silence can be a strategy." I smiled, gave her my number, and told her, "You are allowed to take up space." The Jacksonville house continued to thrive. 1 year after the takeover, it had generated more income than any other property in its neighborhood. It had a waiting list. Guests said it felt different, calmer, wiser. Like whoever owned it had been through something and come out grounded. I never denied it, because it was true. The house had been claimed, and so had I. No more bending. No more apologizing for reclaiming what is mine. Not just a living room, not just a title, but the right to exist fully in my own life. And that is how I won. Not through drama, not through shouting, but through stillness, through a signature. Through the simple power of saying, "This is mine, and I do not owe anyone an explanation."